morning. Welcome to the Let's Grab Coffee podcast. I appreciate you being on the show, man.
George, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
For folks who don't know, I'll get to how I know you and how I've gotten to know you. Uh, Andrew Sykes, you're a salesperson, entrepreneur, speaker. You're a behavior change expert, and you've been doing that for 30 years. We'll get to some of the nuances. What I found super interesting is you started your career building one of South Africa's largest healthcare consulting companies. And among all of this, I mean, these are just tidbits for folks listening. But you're also an aspiring poet, which I kind of love. You had to throw that creative nut in there.
Took a while for it to come out, that's for sure. And it's a
You're
long way from where I started life professionally.
you're a man of many talents, my friend. The personal context is so actually. I think some of my close friends know I just finished an executive MBA, dual program through Kellogg and Schulich. A bunch of my friends in my cohort ended up taking your course, which is world renowned. It's kind of the top 10, course in the US called Entrepreneurial Selling. They loved it. They were sort of raving about it after they took the course. And I just remember I kept hearing about this amazing prof who taught them how to storytell better and how to present and be more magnetic. And he'd always show up in the most eccentric suits. And I was like, out of all the courses I missed, that's the one that as someone who loves fashion, who loves suits, I'm like, this is the guy I missed taking a course with. So personally, I was bummed. And then I ended up meeting you through a mutual event that we went, which was the Economic Club of Chicago, through a mutual friend, Elk, who was kind enough to invite us both. So I ended up meeting you there, and here we are now.
Yeah. Well, I hope you'll come back and audit the course one day. I'm sure you'll love it. And it is such a beautiful course to teach because although it is about entrepreneurial selling, the art of being able to sell someone on an idea before you've even built the product, when you have no customers, you've got no track record, like how do you do that? As many people say about the course, it's really an inquiry into what it means to be a magnetic, trustworthy human being. Because in the end, as an entrepreneur, you're selling you rather than or before you're selling the product that is yet to be built or yet to be bought by anyone.
Why this word, by the way? I keep seeing it like when I was kind of doing a bit of the homework beforehand. I kept seeing a focus not only on the word magnetic, but you'd always have it in caps.
Yes.
So why is this so important to you and everything you sort of talk about?
Well, in the context of sales, but I would say this is true also for leadership and just for how you live your life. Half of the battle is getting time or earning time with people. Now, there's so much data on how customers do all of this research before they interact with salespeople. They don't really look forward to spending time with salespeople. They want the interaction to be short and transactional. Just tell me the price. I've done my research. And all of that is born out of this fear that I'm going to be working with someone who can't be trusted, who's self-interested, and who's just going to try and manipulate me to buy something I don't need. Well, what's the antidote to that is having the kind of personality, the way of being that occurs for people as like, wow, I just want to be around George. There's something charismatic and interesting about him that makes him my kind of person. And I'm happy to spend the time and listen to him and learn from him. But the reason I choose magnetic versus charismatic is a reminder that magnets have two poles. And they are as repulsive as they are attractive. And why I think that matters is, as a salesperson and as a leader, as a human, it's worthwhile remembering if you have a strong enough point of view that makes you unique and interesting, you're also going to be a real turnoff to certain people. And can you design how you show up so that you're charismatic to the people that you need to be, potential customers or your team, and maybe repulsive to the people that aren't in your target market, not because you want to be sort of mean to anyone or exclude them from your network, but just so that you can be focused on the people you are trying to help in life and distinguish the buyers from the shoppers. Because as that old saying goes, like if you're trying to be everything to everybody, you end up being nothing to anyone.
It's interesting you bring charisma. I didn't actually sort of compare the two even remotely close. But now that you say it, the one thing that I'm thinking about is in your opinion, full transparency, do you think magnetism, just like charisma, is it something that someone is sort of innately born with? Because when I think of charisma, that's what I think about. And I know
Yeah.
some people can improve on that spectrum, but to be honest, you can kind of tell when someone's manufacturing charisma, whereas when someone walks in the room, you're just like, man, that person has it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I would say that manufactured charisma is an oxymoron. There is no such thing as real charisma, because it does have that feeling like this person is just somehow,
Yeah.
luckily, unique and interesting. But I'm got to tell you, at least through my personal experience and having taught this for a long time and seen that people can acquire the skill of being charismatic and magnetic, I'm of the view that every skill leads to a personality trait. So
Mm,
every personality trait is an acquirable thing. I would say genius is built and not born. Charisma is developed and not lucky. And in a sense, I've come to view it almost as insulting when people say, you should meet George. He's one of the most charismatic, interesting human beings. He's so lucky he's talented. Like, don't call someone talented, because the truth is what you see as talented misses the thousands of hours of effort and
it's true.
coaching and blood, sweat, and tears that led to this apparently lucky trait. So, yeah, I'm all in on the view that charisma, among many skills, is learnable. And when it's learned, it's no longer inauthentic charisma. It's just who you are.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, now that you say it, and I'm trying to think more about it, I think even if someone, let's say, has more personality traits that lend towards being more charismatic, I even think to myself, like, I also, whether it was binging late night shows and kind of watching how, their mannerisms when they're interviewing guests, or going to thousands of events, and also kind of honing how you have conversations in different settings, in different contexts. I mean, I never thought of that as actual training, because it
Yeah,
was something that I had to do for work, or I enjoyed
right.
doing on the side. But yeah, over time, you sort of get better without noticing.
You do. And I would call that accidental practice. Whereas if you're deliberate, you start with the intention and say, how might I decode and annotate a model of excellence of what charisma looks like? Like, what do charismatic people actually do?
Mm.
There's that famous story of Marilyn Monroe walking down the street with one of her friends, and like no one's noticing her. And her friend asks about it, and she says, well, I'm not Marilyn right now, but I could just turn it on. And her friend is understandably skeptical about it. And she says, watch this, and just becomes Marilyn. And in a moment, people like start coming up to her and falling over and asking her for an autograph. And that kind of thing just occurs for the rest of us. Like, how is that even possible that the same person can just turn on this trait of magnetism? But I believe, like every skill, being able to do it is different from actually doing it. And you
Mm.
can choose to be charismatic or choose not to be. And so I've been a lifelong student of asking this question: what do the most charismatic people do? And for a long time, I would say I got it wrong by making what I think is the common mistake, that charisma equals extroversion.
Mm.
And what I've noticed is, captured by that other favorite saying of mine, to be interesting, be interested. And
Hmm.
many of the people I've seen as charismatic in the way that people gravitate towards them aren't always the ones like a late night host talking and loud and funny, and they often are just quite
It's
quiet,
true,
and they ask phenomenal questions and then listen to you like their life depends on it.
right? And they're sort of
People
drawing you
often,
in. They're drawing in the
yeah,
audience.
yeah. People often talk about Bill Clinton as being one of the most charismatic humans, and the thing that people say about him when they met him is how they felt. And people say the same about Nelson Mandela, another great listener and personal hero of mine, given that I come from South Africa. They said the same thing about both of them. When we met him, I felt like I was the only person in the room of maybe 200 people. And we had this connection where he just wanted to know about me and who I am. And that's so humbling. I think the more prestige and fame people have, the more disarming it is when they just take time to listen and care about someone who is otherwise unimportant to them.
Yeah, and I can imagine the scene where like, let's say if that were the case, and you would expect, let's say randomly I walk and I meet someone who, let's say, is a celebrity, and you're like, wow, I just want to say hi or take a picture, and they stop and give you that 5 minutes, and you're like, oh God, what do I say now?
Yeah,
I didn't I didn't expect them to actually want to listen.
yeah. And I can understand, and thankfully I'm not famous in any way, shape, or form, but I can understand people who have these big personal, or let's say public lives, that it must be really annoying to have people coming up to you all the time. So it takes a discipline and a generosity to stop and speak to someone who's, bugging you for an autograph while you're trying to catch a plane or something.
This switch on, switch off, the back to the Marilyn Monroe example. Curious, for those who may not know Andrew as well, I've seen you whenever you sort of have a big event, let's say if you're doing a keynote speech, you've done a TEDx talk, you've spoken at Google. I know you dress mostly like this when you're doing lectures at Kellogg. You have this like famous purple suit, and I wonder, is that for you your switch on, switch off Marilyn Monroe? Like, do you
It,
become the Marilyn Monroe?
it's a little bit, there are a lot of background stories to the purple suit. It began in my 20s, just noticing that men are traditionally dressed in black and gray and blue, and if you're lucky, a splash of red in a tie. And women
Yeah.
get to dress in all these beautiful colors. And I thought that it was a little unfair, and I wanted to equalize the stakes and allow it to be true that men could dress in any color they want, like every human can be. And then I got the opportunity to teach at Kellogg, and our color is purple, of course. So some people say, do you dress in purple because you teach at Kellogg? I'm like, no, I came to Kellogg because I love purple. It's not quite accurate. But there is also an interesting side to that, which is I'm also aware, given that magnets that have two poles, that showing up as a self-professed salesperson in a three-piece purple suit occurs for many people like, you're just one of those walking slick schmucks. I don't
Yeah.
trust you as far as I can see you. And I know I have a smile that looks like I'm hiding something. So there is a very clear persona that is the antithesis of trust. And I teach trust a lot. So in a sense, I get to play with this when I start a class, and I can see some people are just looking at me like, who is this guy? And I try to embody through the way I teach what it takes to dig your way out of a trust hole, which is what all of us have to do when we meet someone and they have assumed or judged us to be untrustworthy because we're a salesperson, or because we're a politician, or because we're an entrepreneur with an agenda, or a sales leader with a presumed hidden agenda. We're very quick to judge people as having bad intentions. And how do you get over that? So the purple suit is a fun game I get to play with myself. Can I get over the interesting first impression?
Very cool.
Yeah,
It's almost as if, though, I know you also like to wear suits generally,
I do.
and I feel like you're also you leveraging it to make a statement to sort of showcase your learnings. you
Yeah,
know, like,
and
let me physically show you how this would look
that's
like.
true. And then the course that your friends and colleagues took, it's a 5-day course, but the MBA version of it is 10 weeks.
Mm.
And so over 10 weeks, I have the opportunity to wear a different colored suit for 8 weeks. And then in week 9, I show up in jeans and a t-shirt and a worn leather jacket. And instead of standing at the front of the room presenting like a professional speaker, I sit and I cross my arms, and the effect is jarring. And it's a visual way of making the point, like how you choose to show up affects how people relate to you. And there's a big conversation in America in particular about being authentic and being your true self and not letting anyone tell you how to dress or show up. And I empathize with a lot of that, particularly my female colleagues and people of color who have been told that they are not appropriate in some way. Like, to hell with that. And you do have a choice of how you design yourself as a gift for other people. And I think it's a humble thing to ask yourself the question, how do I have to, or how do I get to dress, speak, and show up so that George goes home tonight and says to his wife, it was a joy to meet Andrew. Can you have that impact on people? Like Maya Angelou said, they'll forget what you said and what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Can you do that for someone else?
Yeah, 100%. Are you a fan of Guy Ritchie, by the way, Andrew?
A little, yeah.
You know the director?
I
Yeah,
do.
so he's also and you can kind of tell in his movies, most notably, let's say the recent one, Gentleman, King Richards, I believe, but he always focuses on dressing up people. Like you can tell both men and women, like you can see their outfits are over the top. They're amazing, top of the line fashion, suits, very sort of traditional and nice. And he was on I think the Joe Rogan podcast, if I'm not mistaken. And he was talking about why that's so important to him. And he showed up in a 3-piece. Joe's sitting there in a shirt,
Yeah.
jeans, like Levi's jeans and a hat with a fanny pack. And he's like, why are you so overdressed, dude? This is a like, relax a little bit. And he, guy was saying that um, to him, it's almost like the modern day armor. He's wearing a suit, so he's talking about men, but he's saying that, yeah, in today's world, you seldom see that. And for him, it's a sign of respect. Like he's showing up to this. And if I come and it doesn't always necessarily have to be a suit, but really what he's saying is if I come and I show you that I'm prepared and I'm tidy and I took care of myself and I put myself together and I showered, I did my hair, I cleaned my beard, I put on a suit, I took the time to show up for you. Yeah, that sort of communicates something.
Yeah.
That this isn't just a regular meeting.
Yeah. Now, I have had the experience, so when I've shown up, especially to technology companies where the dress code is sort of shorts and t-shirts.
Sandals.
It turned out to have been a mistake to be overdressed in that sense. And so my rule of thumb is, taking a leaf out of Guy Ritchie's book, show respect by being dressed to the same level as your customers are, plus one level more of formality, or maybe two at most. But if I show up to, I don't know, 4th of July party where everyone's in shorts and t-shirts and I'm wearing a tuxedo, that goes from being well-dressed and prepared to just downright weird. So there is a balance there.
Yeah. You talk a lot about both the 10-week and the 5-day, EMBA or MBA course. A lot of it is on trust. I'm curious, when students walk into your classroom, I want to ask two things in terms of how do they, what are their misconceptions? Let's start on the first one. What are their misconceptions about trust over the course of your teaching career that you've seen is so common?
Yes.
That people get wrong?
There are a couple of them. First, and probably the most dangerous, is the assumption that I am trustworthy because I tell the truth, I have good intentions, and I keep my promises. And, when I say that, I'm guessing your response is, well, of course that makes you trustworthy, Andrew. And my response would be that those things, good intentions, telling the truth, and keeping your promises, are indeed worthy of trust. However, when people judge you as trustworthy or not, it happens before you've made or kept a promise. It happens before they've had the data on which to judge, are you telling the truth? And it happens based on their perceptions of your intentions, not the reality. So the truth is, people judge you as trustworthy or not based on a bunch of false signals in the milliseconds to minutes when they meet you. And it's unfair, and such is life. So that's the first one, is there is a big difference between having integrity, which is truthfulness or honesty, good intentions, and keeping your word, and assessed trustworthiness, which is someone's judgment of you made on false signals. So that's one. And what flows from that is the second misperception. And we've all felt this, and so we believe it to be true, that trust takes time to build. And all the research says, no, it doesn't. It happens in literally milliseconds, maybe minutes. Can it grow over time? Absolutely. But when we think we are taking time to build trust, often all we're doing is climbing out of a trust hole. And that does take months. If you've met someone and something that they did in the first impression has you not like them or not trust them, and you can't really put your finger on it, you're going to interpret everything they say through that lens. And it'll take months for you to change your mind if their first impression is poor. So I would say those are two things that are really true about the misperceptions of trust. And then when it comes to the overarching goal of the course, the misperception that flows from that about what it means to sell, people come into the course thinking they're going to learn the skills of influencing someone to buy something.
Mm-hmm.
And my view is to sell is to help another human being make progress in their lives. It's a generous service opportunity. And if you think about sales like that, it gets you out of this icky feeling that people have dealing with salespeople and being a salesperson. I think it's something to be very proud of. It's like a generous, honest, wonderful occupation if done well.
Yeah, so much in there. I mean, it's also, I'll stick to the last point. It's also a bit more difficult than people, sometimes realize.
Yeah.
In all of its sort of detailed activities, and not all of it is sexy and fun. And you put on a tuxedo and you go to an event, like you do that maybe as an ancillary piece of your overall function.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
It's gritty
It's
and it's hard.
emotional.
And I think one of the reasons people struggle so much is many careers reward knowledge acquisition.
Mm.
So if you're an engineer or a physician or a lawyer, the more you know, the better you get paid generally.
Yeah.
In sales, knowing too much is sometimes, I wouldn't say it's a disadvantage, because I do think knowledge is power. But selling is a set of embodied skills. And it's not what you learn at university, and it's not what you learn by reading a book or reading research papers. You only acquire embodied skills by the doing of them, like you said earlier, not lots and lots of reps of meeting people and seeing what works and what doesn't, or better, having a coach who can guide you on these behavioral skills so that you're matching how you behave with what you know, and they're in balance. I think it's very common for salespeople to, as they say, show up and throw up and try and demonstrate that they should be trusted because of how much they know. No one trusts you because of how much you know. They trust you because of how you make them feel.
It's very true. I don't know if I've told you this, but my wife's a clinical psychologist.
Awesome.
And I often joke with her. I'm like, I regard what I do more as relational selling. Working for a stock exchange, connecting people to get the desired outcome. So it's not necessarily product sales. It's maybe you're selling a platform, let's say, for companies to get on to raise capital. But I joke with her often that I feel like I'm more of a therapist. When I talk to CEOs of companies, I'm literally sitting there and just listening. I'm like, what are you going through? What are some pain points? Where can I help? And I'm listening and I'm listening. And I used to, and I learned this a lot from my wife. I used to, much like many of us in business, we were very quick to propose a solution. And she taught me like the art of venting. Like sometimes, George, people just need space. Give them the space and they'll actually reveal a lot more to you. And you can then use that, not necessarily in a malicious way by any means, but it's more so that it's your solution back to them is tailored in a way that is actually helpful for what they need today. Not necessarily what you're like when you were suggesting, like just kind of spitting the salesperson who just gets on the call and like, hey, this is a product, I'm sure you need it, and we can lower the price, and
Yeah.
So
It's
very
so
much the
interesting
therapy.
you raise that. I think your wife's obviously very wise. I would say maybe 100 times in my career, I've had a customer say to me in a conversation, Andrew, this feels like therapy. And the first few times it happened, I'm like, ooh, maybe I've been a little bit too personal. And now when it happens, I get this internal and probably a big external grin on my face, because what I've come to realize is when selling feels like therapy, you're doing it right. Because wouldn't you want a salesperson to really care about who you are and what you're trying to achieve in life and how you feel about it and how you are already thinking about solving the problem before they dare to tell you how it should be done? Like, none of us like being told what to do, especially by a salesperson whose motives we may not trust yet.
Right. And they're incentivized in a different way. What
Well,
are
that's
some of
the
those?
thing, people often
What's
say,
that?
why are salespeople the least trustworthy profession in every survey? And they are. And I would say a little bit of it is explained by some bad salespeople's bad behavior and our experience of that as buyers. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that we all know salespeople are paid commission. And so we all assume salespeople have a motive that isn't in our interests, which is why I also say to leaders when I'm teaching leadership, to sell is to lead, and to lead is to sell. And you have the same trust problem as a leader as you do as a salesperson. Although you may not be known to make commission, leaders are assumed to have bad intentions because they're assumed to have hidden agendas, or, a motive for the company that supersedes the motive for employees. As soon as someone suspects your motive is not in their best interests, they put you in that trust hole, whether you're a leader, clinical psychologist, or a salesperson.
Yeah, that's so true. I've honestly, I faced this as well. And I don't know what you think of this, but one thing that's really worked for me is to sort of get ahead of this sort of hole, especially on the incentive side, and just mention to a CEO or a founder who may be a prospect, how I'm incentivized. Not necessarily in detail, but I will say in many of my calls, I'll say, like, I'm not an independent advisor, so you're not paying me anything. I'm full time with the TSX. It's important you know that up front. But I am incentivized to help you cross the line. And I think it's important that is the case, because that means I'm more willing to work harder and make sure that this is a seamless process. You want someone who's also has some, sort of sweat equity in this whole process. Otherwise, the effort isn't matched, let's say.
Yeah. I do think that one option is revealing the truth of it, because they're assuming you have an incentive. And so saying, yes, I do, and here's how it's structured. But I think what I'm hearing in how you describe that is the other piece I would talk about, which is why you do what you do. And my default is to focus on that more than any conversation about compensation, because the question people are asking is, George, who are you and what do you want? And unless you address that, they're going to assume you're a salesperson wanting to maximize your commission. So give them the answer to that question. And the answer isn't, I'm a salesperson trying to maximize commission. The answer is, I'm a financial advisor who really cares about the outcome for my clients, or I'm a professor at a business school because I love the opportunity to change the way that people think about trust in their lives. So tell people why you do what you do, so they don't have to guess, because if they guess, they're going to assume it's for personal self-interest.
Yeah. And also showing them, that's a really good point. I think now I'm reflecting on what it is that I usually say. And for me, it's actually building a successful market. And in fact, I let them know very honestly, it doesn't do me any good if, let's say, you do go public in the Midwest, the market I cover, and you end up failing miserably. So it's whether it's selfish or even, if you think it's genuine or not, it's in my best interest to make sure that you do very, very well. And I see you grow. So whether you believe me or not, and I think if you sort of do, it sort of disarms the conversation, you know?
And George, it's such a big deal. You asked, what do students expect when they come into my course? And then what do they get? They are certainly not expecting a 3-hour conversation about how you design the first 3 minutes of meeting someone. They're like, are you kidding me, Andrew? It's just meeting someone. Let's get on to the real stuff, like how to sell. And my response to that is, I believe that 90% of a sale is over in the first hour when you meet someone. And in that first hour that I call the golden hour, 90% of the magic happens in the first 5 minutes, the platinum 5 minutes of a meeting with someone. And if you have not in your life spent time designing your first 5 minutes when you meet someone, given you'll meet 10,000 people in your life, what a missed opportunity. Are you just going to go through life and hope that you'll make it up on the spot and it'll be awesome? Or do you respect people enough to be deliberate about how you design your first impression? So we spend 3 hours just on what exactly do you do for the first milliseconds, and then the first 10 seconds, and then the small talk. And then how do you answer the question, what do you do? Because we're always asked that, and most people completely blow that opportunity.
What are your favorite go-tos for your 5 minutes? Say this is a prospect call. It's the first time you ever talk to me. What are some of those kind of triggers for you that you love to bring up?
Well, I think there are 3 things that I've learned to do that I didn't do naturally, and I don't think many of us do naturally. The one is make it easy for people to remember your name. And I know that sounds trivial. But we all, or many of us, say, I'm bad at remembering names. It's nonsense. We all have a good memory. What we're bad at doing is either paying attention when we meet someone so we hear their name, or actually, I believe the fault lies on the other side. We're bad at introducing ourselves. Because mostly people say something like, "Hey, George, I'm Andrew Sykes. Nice to meet you." And you've had no warning that my name is coming. I've given you my first and my last name. I rushed through it, and you were distracted because you're worrying about introducing yourself. So what I've learned to do is, instead of saying I'm first, last name, I say my name is, and I pause a little to check that you're ready to hear it. And then I just share my first name, Andrew.
Love it.
And people roll their eyes when they hear this, and then I challenge them to go and do it, and they're amazed by the difference it makes. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is choosing to stand apart by having the courage not to say, "How are you?" Or rather, given that it's so ingrained in us, to catch yourself when you say, "How are you?" and let it be a trigger to ask a more interesting connection question. And here's the opportunity. You and I worked together for 10 years, George. If every day I see you, I say, "How are you, George?" And you say, "Fine, thanks, Andrew. How are you?" And I say, "Fine, thanks." And we go to our desks. 10 years later, our relationship is veneer thin. But if I say, "George, I just came back from a dad-daughter trip with my daughter Caroline to New York. We had an amazing time. May I ask you, what was one of your favorite vacations as a kid or as a parent if you have kids?" And the interesting thing about asking a very specific connection question is, I think as humans, we tend to assume people are very different based on how we look, our age, our ethnicity, our race, our gender. I'm of the view that human beings are like almost the same people underneath all of that. And all it takes is to remind someone of that, is to surface some part of our common humanity. So if I say, "George, what's your favorite book and what impact did it have on your life?" Your answer will be different from mine. But the fact that we both have a favorite book, suddenly I'm thinking, George is my kind of guy. We both love books. Well, at least we both have a favorite book. So that's my second thing, is be more interesting than asking simply, "How are you?" And then the third big thing for me is, when someone says, "What do you do?" have a 3-sentence story that shows why you do what you do, not a resume summary, which more than likely has people assume you're a self-interested salesperson or a self-interested leader. I'll give you the difference. So imagine you're going for surgery tomorrow. You've got 2 choices of surgeon. Surgeon A says, "Hey, George, I've done this procedure 50,000 times. I get the best clinical outcomes in the whole industry. I make a lot of money doing this. Can't wait to cut you open tomorrow."
Oh boy.
Or Surgeon B says, "George, when I was 10 years old, my older brother died from this disease, and I promised myself no other family would suffer the same outcome. I get good clinical outcomes, and I'm looking forward to working with you tomorrow." Who would you choose?
Of course, the latter.
Yeah. And the truth is, based on the data, you should choose Dr. A.
Yeah.
More and better outcomes, paid better, maybe as a proxy for quality. But we are suckers for a story, because all we really want to know when we meet someone is, why do you do what you do? Because that answers the question, who are you? And that's what we're afraid of. Like, we're afraid you're not a friend, you're an enemy. You're not an ally, you're a risk.
Yeah, that personal touch is so... Can I share a quick story on this? So one of the courses that we had was like an M&A course, right? And the final project, you're put in a group, and you're sort of pitching to potential sellers. So you're acquiring, and everybody comes up with their own price, their own valuation, and you come up with a story and you present, and they pick. They do some Q&A. They sort of hound you at the end.
Yeah.
And we were in a pretty tough, let's say, cohort of different presentations. Really good, all very good. One of them was super analytical, Andrew. Like exactly like the first doctor you're talking about. Had like 6 different rows of potential prices, and they ended up. It was a little bit confusing, but it was so technical and masterful. And one of the guys who was in that group comes from the PE background. Like it was very solid work. And we ended up presenting, and I remember in our slide deck I put a picture of my wife and I in Ireland, because this was to acquire potentially a hotel booking site. And before we even started talking about pricing and valuation, Mike, I just wanted to share a quick story. My wife and I actually got engaged at one of your properties. Not true. It was, for the classroom. So I'm not saying, like, obviously try to be genuine and be honest about it. But everybody started laughing. And we ended up being chosen towards the end. And I remember the professor saying, never discount the importance of a personal touch, no matter how important you think a deal is. Like in this case, everybody looked at it and probably was like, well, why does this even matter? But if you're a buyer, having just even that slight personal edge and the differentiation, I think goes a long way.
Yeah,
So,
I'm getting goosebumps listening to that story. It's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing it. And it reminds me of the thing that I say as a drumbeat in my entrepreneurial selling course, which is customers first decide that they want to buy from you before they decide if and what they want to buy from your company. And
that's
that's
a great one.
quite a profound thing to contemplate, because it means like everything I've got to say about my product and my service and my track record and my case studies and my referral customers, none of that matters until and unless someone has decided that they believe you. And one of the exercises I do, which is quite fun, is I ask people to draw a circle, like a pie graph, that represents the billions of facts you know in the world. Your views on climate change, if you're religious, your views on that, if you're not, your views on that, your political views, everything you know about your technical job. And then I ask people, draw for me the slice of that knowledge that you have, that you acquired firsthand. So you believe climate change is real, you flew to the North Pole, you drilled some holes, you extracted the core, you did the analysis, or did you read a book, watch a podcast, listen to an influencer? And for most people, and certainly my answer is like 0.00001% of my knowledge is acquired firsthand. I read it, I learned it, I listened to someone. And if that's true, even if your number is 5%, it still speaks to this rule. As humans, first we decide whom to trust, and that determines what we believe. So if you're a leader and you want people to believe you about the vision we have, or if you're a salesperson, you want someone to believe you about your product, you've got one job, which is to have them trust you as a human. The rest is easy, which is why 5 days of entrepreneurial selling is really 5 days of how do you build trust through your first impression? How do you build trust by the way you ask questions? How do you build trust by the way you listen to feel rather than listen to fix? Good advice from your wife. How do you...
That's a hard one.
Yeah. How do you tell stories instead of tell people what to do so they can see for themselves? Because no one likes being told what to do. But how do you tell stories in a way that builds trust? So it's really just 5 days in the art and science of being the most trustworthy human in every room.
Where to you does confidence come into all of this?
Confidence for me is a trait that requires adjustment. And what I mean by that is being super confident is attractive to many people, but there is a line at which you go from confident to arrogant. And so I would say there is a level of confidence that's appropriate to the situation, the person, and the stage of the relationship. And there are moments to be bold and there are moments to be humble. And it's not either or, it's the balance between the two. So for example, listening is an act of humility, whereas asking questions done well is an act of boldness. So it's the combination of the two. And I love the conversation about confidence, because one of my favorite pieces of research is that Dunning-Kruger research into the Dunning-Kruger effect, the people we know who are incompetent, so much so that they can't judge their own incompetence, and as a result are super confident. We've all known like confident idiots in our time.
Oh yeah.
Where I say I've been one of those in some domains. So I like the idea that true growth requires that your confidence drops first as you get to see, like, I thought I had this, I don't have this. There's a lot more depth to it than I imagined. And just in a domain like listening, most human beings are pretty good listeners, but there's a difference between Bill Clinton listening, Nelson Mandela listening, Oprah Winfrey listening, and pretty good. And as soon as you get clarity on that gap that we all have,
Mm.
I think you lose some confidence. You're like, oh boy, this is a lot more complex than I thought.
Yeah, that is true. And confidence, to me, much like happiness, kind of ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
You know, I've kind of found actually more recently, I don't know, I kind of wanted to ask you this because I know you are quite uh, of a public figure in your domain, and you do these big speeches and you're in front of a large crowd. And I know a lot of people struggle with public speaking. And they mostly struggle with public speaking, not necessarily because of the content, but because of being in front of other people
Yes.
and, you know, facing kind of judgment. So I'm curious for you, how do you deal? And the reason I asked this as a segue is back to the confidence. Confidence to me ebbed and flowed a lot in my career. And what I found through the help of my wife actually is how to use vulnerability as a tool. And I tried this for the first time. I don't know if you've ever. It doesn't appear that you would ever need to use this, but I was trying to. This was more of a work event and kind of like a theater style room. And for some reason, Andrew, I don't know what ended up. I started feeling very nervous, like right before I was about to kind of go on and kick it off. And I kid you not, I just looked at everybody, kind of paused, and I was just like, to be honest with you, I'm a little nervous. Not gonna lie. And as soon as I said that, I just went for the next 30 minutes and gave sort of an A plus what I thought was an A plus performance, zero nervousness, you know. And I just tried to be open. I'm like, let me actually just see what happens if I do that. What's the worst? And if in fact everybody sort of embraced me, you know, everybody was more engaged, and they're like, man, you know what? They came up to me after, like, you didn't seem nervous at all. Like, that was amazing, but thank you for being open. So curious for you, do you ever battle with nervousness? How do you coach people through that if they're public speaking?
Yeah. Awesome question. And you just made another case for the wisdom of your wife.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
here's what I'll say. A couple of ways in. As a professional speaker, I have had 10 or 15 talks in my life for which I have not been nervous, and they've all gone really badly. And what I now know is that if I'm not nervous before a talk, it's because I haven't put it enough at stake, and I'm not taking enough of a risk to get myself into this nervous, dare I say, almost terrified state. And so, as crazy as it sounds, if I show up for a talk and I'm feeling confident and relaxed, then I excuse myself. I go outside and I start choosing to drop some pieces of my talk and add in new pieces, or find some way to add risk into it until I'm nervous again. Because I've found that only when I'm nervous do I deliver fantastically, because I believe that nervousness is simply your body's way of telling you you're ready to perform, and it's an energy that you can channel. Now, can it collapse you? For sure. But I think that practice is a substitute for courage, and practice is how you turn nervousness into performance. And one of the ways that I get nervous is by choosing to be vulnerable. And you're right. Vulnerability is a superpower, because it is deliberately choosing to put yourself at risk for humiliation. And
Yeah.
paradoxically, people love when you're vulnerable. And the last anecdote, I have a couple of colleagues at Kellogg who are phenomenal speakers. And I've had the luxury of having a few of them watch me and give me feedback. And two of them, Carter Cast, who's an amazing marketing professor, and Suzanne Muchin, said it in a particular way. And my friend and colleague Craig Bortman, similar advice. They said, and this is the gist, not the actual words, Andrew, you're too polished. And as a result, you're unrelatable. And so you leave people feeling impressed, but not inspired. So what I recommend is you stop trying so hard to be word perfect and articulate and well-dressed and like all the things that I spend hundreds of hours trying to be, and like, just be a little bit more human, make some mistakes, just be relatable. And boy, are they right. And it really stung, that feedback, but they nailed it, which is, we don't like watching someone who leaves us feeling like, good for them, I'm amazed and impressed by what they can do. We love watching someone who leaves us feeling like, hey, if you can do it, I can do it.
Mm.
And that requires a level of vulnerability and humanness and relatability. And that's a skill that I've had to learn because it wasn't my default.
Yeah, it's so hard because the default feeling, I think for a lot of men, I don't want to generalize, but I can speak for myself, is that it makes us feel weak,
Yeah.
But in that moment, I just felt such a sense of relief. And imagine I was doing this in front of my boss and his, like, kind of two seniors up in
Yeah.
my company. And
Right.
I'm just like, I just don't care. I'd rather kind of give it up now and let people see my true cards of how I'm feeling in this moment for whatever reason. Maybe I'm feeling anxious maybe because I ate dessert before the speech and I forgot. And now, the insulin's heightened and I'm just, maybe it's not even the presentation itself, but let's call it spades. Here's how I'm feeling. Here's what you get today. But I'm about to give you 100% of who George is in this moment.
Yeah.
You know?
And, I think that people see it as an act of courage to
Mm.
tell one on yourself, you sort of reveal your inner fears because everyone's terrified of public speaking or professional speaking. So it makes you much more relatable.
Mm.
I've come to the view that being vulnerable, like many things, is a skill that you can acquire.
Mm-hmm.
And the more vulnerable you are, the bigger risks you can take in being vulnerable. But I've also come to talk to my body in a different way. You said earlier, one of the things I'm aspiring to be is a performance poet. I don't really know what that is or whether I'm any good at it. But one of the poems I wrote is called The Butterfly Trap.
Mm.
And what I realized is we have three metaphors or phrases for that horrible feeling in your stomach. One is, I've got a knot in my stomach. One is just the description, I feel nauseated. And one is, I've got butterflies in my stomach. And physically, they feel very similar to me. But a knot in my stomach ties me down. Butterflies in my stomach, ready to fly. So I've started to
That's beautiful.
think about what is my body feeling and how can I tell myself a story about those bodily feelings that empowers my performance, not constricts it. I label that as mindset. I think all a mindset really is in the end is a story we tell ourselves about ourselves. So when I'm going on stage, I'll now say, I'm ready because I'm terrified and I want to throw up versus I'm going to blow this because I want to throw up.
Yeah. I wanted to end on, thank you for that. That is, and thank you for being vulnerable also, because I think it's so reassuring both to myself and to everyone listening that it is okay. It's almost, it not only is normal, it's almost, it's not normal not to feel nervous. And I love hearing that from people who are constantly out and doing this, let alone for, your full-time focus. It's so reassuring to hear because you're a practitioner when it comes to public speaking. And if you, out of all people, also have to deal with this, I think we'll all be okay, basically.
Let me tell
You
you,
know?
if I ever feel completely at ease before a big talk, it's time to retire.
Mm. Last one for you, Andrew, and I want to be mindful. I know we're heading into the weekend here, long weekend. I would be remiss not to bring up behaviors. And I know this deserves another hour podcast, which we will do. There are a few people who I really like to have on for sequels, and I already can tell this is not an hour conversation only. But what sort of behaviors, from everything you've learned, a 30-year plus career, what were the most important behaviors that you've instilled in your own life?
Three things. The most powerful life changer for me has been developing the habit of listening with empathy, listening to feel rather than listening to fix. It's number one. Number two, I would say, is leading with story, not with facts and figures. As a recovering actuary and behavioral researcher, I loves me a good fact and a good statistic. And what it took a long time for me to learn is no one gives a damn unless you can wrap it in a beautiful story.
Hmm.
And I would say the third, and was the subject of my book, The 11th Habit, is the foundational habit of self-care. Because so many of us, especially people who care about other people, tend to sacrifice ourselves at the altar of our customers and our companies and our spouses and our kids. And it took a while for me to get clear, I can't be at the top of my game performing for other people unless I first invest in my own health, happiness, and financial security, not as an act of selfishness, but as an act of service to other people. Like, I want to show up feeling like $1 million because then I'll perform, versus feeling tired and stressed and exhausted and run down. So that took a long time for me to get clear. Like, investing in myself is a gift to other people. It's not a take away from other people.
Yeah, put the God forbid max oxygen mask on first before you help other people. But that adage is so important. Hopefully not enough. We don't have
I wish I'd
to
said
see
it
this
that succinctly, because that metaphor says what I wanted to say in a tenth of the words. Thank you for being here.
No, yours is definitely more uplifting, and let's definitely use yours. Well, good sir, I have to thank you very much for this inspiring conversation, impactful conversation. I almost knew this is how it would go, having met you very, very briefly over dinner, and I can't thank you enough for all the good work you do and just kind of the positive energy you bring every day and all the content you do on LinkedIn.
Yeah. George, likewise, you will have told, if you're watching this, or you would be able to tell if you're watching this, I've had a smile on my face for 50 minutes. I mean, I can feel my cheeks are actually sore, and that's for me a great sign. I'm in the company of someone who's just lovely. Thank you for being that.